This is a virtual reading of Conspirators, To Each His Own Agenda by Mag Gupta.
Chapter 31. The Victory Road. The battle was all but lost. Everybody knew it. Julius slashed his way to his feet, his sword growing redder and redder with each kill. In between each kill, Tathar was shouting out orders. He was a testament to the idea that a leader must have a loud voice as well as a strong sword arm. But it was no good. They were completely surrounded, and their horses were screaming in terror in the confined space. It was only after an hour of fighting, when their lines had collapsed so much that they were fighting back to back and 2 men deep, that a horn sounded from the east. Julius couldn't help but abandon the fight to look. A huge dust cloud was emerging from the horizon, and it closed in. Reinforcements? He thought to himself. How? But he didn't have time to think, as a spiked club smashed into his armored chest. The newly arriving soldiers on the left were coming into view. There were hundreds of them. All of them infantry, the sun shining brightly off of their armor and spearheads. Every man was in pure white, and as they came into view, anyone who looked could see the white plumes protruding from their helms. The Fountain Court Hoplite Legion had come. Despite their heavy armor and the fact that they were on foot, they closed the gap between themselves and the pirates with the speed of a horse. Or maybe Julius simply lost track of time in the confusion of battle. The Fountain Court Lord Warden Commander shouted something in the ancient and forgotten kingdom tongue, and the hoplites sprung into a wedge-shaped phalanx formation, their elegantly sharp spears outstretched and their shields interlocked at a diagonal angle, so they were a wall of shields, with their spears resting in the slits, so every spear was perfectly placed. They were the very best standard of hoplite formations, the heaviest armor, longest spears, and the highest level of training. They began to sound the beat of their march and smashed into the pirate lines. Their formation didn't falter. Not even a single man stepped out of the safety of their comrades. The pirates panicked at the sight of the new threat and rushed at them, the worst thing to do against a hoplite formation. Before long, the lines folded under the weight of the Fountain Warriors. The horns were deafening, and the legionaries under Julius suddenly found they had stepped out of their confines. Julius could count each man left, and they were exhausted. But he rallied them, and they charged. The Fountain Legion joined them, breaking from their shield wall and charging straight at the enemy with a terrifying chorus, as loud as their war horns. They had incredible speed, and before the pirates could react, they had surrounded them, leaving only the right flank free for their escape. The ships were firing their bows and trying to fire their ballista at the encroaching enemy, but their arrows were simply bouncing off the armor and shields of the hoplites, ineffective and useless. The ballista was slightly better, but they ended up taking more of their own men as the Fountain Legion. They didn't stop. They felt no fear and did not falter. Before long, the pirate army broke. They fled in full retreat, but the legionaries closed in before they could escape. Those who did manage to escape headed for the beach to try and swim for their ships. But then suddenly, as the sun moved behind a cloud, the pirate ships began exploding in huge fireballs. Julius let out a laugh, and his army cheered. The pirates turned in terror to watch their ships and comrades burn. Out of the east, behind the ships, tiny fire ships were rolling along the water, and when they collided with the pirate ships, they exploded in a glorious blaze of light. The sounds of the men's screams echoed across the water and filled the ears of every soldier. "Hold!" Tathar shouted, The Lord Warden commander of the Fountain Court shouted something in the old tongue, and the Fountain Court crashed to a halt. Julius walked to the Lord Warden when the air finally grew still and the pirates were diving in the river in a futile attempt to escape. "You've saved us," he panted, almost collapsing. "How can we ever thank you?" "It is you that we must thank," the Lord Warden spoke in the common tongue, his face obscured behind his blue face mask. "You are the only ones in the kingdom who fight for its defense. We are honored to come to your aid, my lord." He bowed, as did the other hoplites. 1,000 men were bowing to him. In that moment, Julius felt so small. He stammered, as he collected himself. "Let's discuss this in the command tent." The Lord Warden nodded. He shouted something in the ancient tongue to his men, and they began to march in different directions to enact a series of prearranged orders. The commanders met in the command tent. Julius gave the head seat to the Lord Warden, but he graciously declined. He didn't sit, choosing instead to stand in his full armor and helmet, his razor-sharp spear standing rigidly against his shoulder. Even past his mask, they could see he was a man of many years, yet he held himself up as a man still in his prime. "How did you come to be here?" the Swan asked, the question clearly eating at him. "I thought the Fountain Legion didn't get involved with the affairs of the kingdom until the king returned." "The king has been absent for many centuries," the Lord Warden agreed, turning to face the Swan. The nature of his helmet meant that he had to turn fully to see who was talking. "We defend the realm for him and in his name, but we answer to no lord." "So you just came here to help us?" Tathar demanded, dabbing at his blood-stained brow with a cloth. "You just mobilized and came down out of the goodness of your heart." "Not quite." The Lord Warden narrowed his eyes, looking down at Tathar with something resembling quiet disdain. "We've been waiting for something like this for years now. The war with the Golden King has revealed the truth in the men that lead the kingdom. The men of the Fountain can't stand by anymore. We must protect the realm before it tears itself apart." "But you are honor-bound to not fight except for the king." The Swan cast a glance at Julius. "Are you saying you see Lord Julius as the next king of the kingdom?" "No," the Lord Warden shook his head. "Of course not. But you and your men are the only forces in the area defending the realm from true invaders, not just garrisoning against raiders. If you fall, the whole kingdom does too. General Felthor made me realize that. Once we heard you were facing this threat alone, we mobilized and marched. A single cohort could hold out against an army like that, so why send so many?" Tathar asked. "I value the lives of my men," the Lord Warden said. "I won't be careless with them." "Where did you get the ships from?" the Swan asked. "A genius of Admiral Mistnir," the Lord Warden smiled under his mask. "He is a man who understands sacrifice. His men are good swimmers, so they managed to get away safely." "So what now?" Julius asked. "Will you stay?" "For now," the Lord Warden nodded. "My men will return to the capital soon. Your men can hold the coast now that this fleet has been destroyed. If another one threatens you, find us and we'll come to you." "Thank you, Lord Warden." Julius stood up. "At least join us for the celebration." "No," Tathar shouted. "I can't afford enough drinks for a further 1,000 men." "We do not drink." The Lord Warden looked down at him through his helmet with suspicion. "Nor do we lay with women. It is our way." "I don't think I can trust a man who doesn't drink," Tathar muttered. "We respect the traditions of our friends," Julius said, pointedly. "We welcome you to join us in my castle of Pharas." "Thank you, my lord," the Lord Warden said. "But if we garrison with you, then we will be declaring for Sea Ward." "No, we must remain in the country. We will be suitably situated here." Julius nodded. In the back of his mind, he didn't understand why even these men were clinging to politics, but he did not want to seem ingracious. We will send food and supplies from seaward, unless your oaths preclude you from receiving our resources. Not at all, the Lord Warden said. He seemed to relax slightly and lowered his spear. We do not require much. Our needs are simple. Whatever you need, Julius smiled. I trust that our celebration will not disturb your religious practices. Our prayers are not a thing that can be interrupted by the physical plane. My men sing our prayers in the heat of battle if need be. I may join you, Julius nodded. We have much to be thankful for. The Lord Warden bowed and then showed himself out. Was it just me, or was he a bit strange? Tathar said, after a long moment. The men of the fountain court are very pious, Julius agreed, but there was something of the divines in this day. They left the tent and watched the Fountain Legion deploy out into the battlefield to begin dealing with the dead and wounded. Maybe I'll sign up for the Fountain Guard someday, the Swan said in a longing voice. The women of the kingdom will be devastated, Julius clapped him on the shoulder, particularly the wife of the Kingslayer. I can live without that, the Swan shook his head. I can't, though. Julius held out a hand. I need you. Shame, the Swan smiled. I like their helmets. I'm sure you do, Julius smirked. Now let's get the butchery out the way. Let's tally up our strength. It was a depressing scene. The fighting strength was down to double numbers. Only 7 knights had survived with only 30 men at arms, along with themselves. They could hear the screams of the men from the medical tents, but they couldn't do anything for them. The healers were doing everything they could, but most of the methods of saving people were amputations and burning wounds closed. The amount of infections were staggering. Halfhead was amongst them. His shoulder had gone very green, and he was bleeding pus more than blood. Julius ordered him to report to the healers, but Halfhead grunted that he would rather lose his arm than let his men see how wounded he was. Stubborn though this was, Julius couldn't help but admire him for his courage. But he ordered Halfhead to report to the healers, arguing that the smell was turning his stomach. He could vaguely hear the screams from the tents and did what he could to block them out. The consensus of the group was to return to Pharas and leave the Fountain Court to defend the coast, while they rebuild their own forces. The Swan seemed quite confident that finding knights to help them would be simple after this battle, as many knights who had refused them in the past would feel ashamed that they were not able to gain such renown in this victory. Even in death, every knight had earned themselves a place in the Hall of the Silver Tide and in legend, one of the greatest honours in all of Seaward. Men-at-arms would be a problem, though, as it had taken Julius all this time to get the small amount of soldiers to come with them as it was. The 2,000 being assembled for Tathar would be their only hope for a garrison-able force, or a force that could take Sicilia. They took comfort in the fact that the Fountain Legion would stand guard over the land while they licked their wounds. The sun set on that day, and the screams from the tents began to die down. Julius had attempted to visit his dying men and offer help, but his hands were made for soldiering, and the healers demanded that he leave. Instead, he found himself simply looking out at the ocean, past the burnt wreckages of the pirate ships, and out into the southern horizon. A ship of Seaward had blockaded the area and were salvaging what they could. For the first time, he noticed the stars and the moon. He had been taught that the ancestors watched down on the world when the stars were out, so in this night, they must be impressed by what had happened. His thoughts turned to his own father, how he must feel about this victory. Alistair was an accomplished leader and one of the most skilled warriors in all of the kingdom. But even he hadn't won a victory such as this. Military victory was something of a necessity in the citadel politics for members of the ruling families. This was his victory, regardless of who actually won it. Now the time he had dreaded had come. Now he was expecting the politics to cloud him. He had the feeling of being small again. He had done little except bloody himself and command the reserves into position. The rewards of the battle should go to Tatha and the Swan, as they had done the commanding. He should also make sure that the Lord Warden be commended for coming to their aid, and the fact that he destroyed almost the entire force with barely 10 men lost. This would certainly be entered into the kingdom's most glorious chapters in history, but history would only remember the leaders and the number of soldiers. He had lost many friends here, and he feared he would lose more to the healers' tents. The celebration in Seaward awaited him and his men, but he didn't want to celebrate. He wanted to simply go back to Pharas and sleep. For the first time in his life, he was considering going to a brothel to be with a whore. Tathar came over to him. "Come and eat something," he said cheerily, but cautiously. "The men are wondering where you are." Julius nodded. "I will. I don't think I could stomach any wine, though." Tathar frowned, but he seemed to understand what Julius was going through. "We'll get you some rosewater and tell the men it's wine." Julius nodded and went with Tathar. The command tent was filled with the remaining men-at-arms, both the survivors and those who had been discharged from the medical tents. There wasn't many of them, so the tent wasn't particularly full. When the men saw Julius, they exploded out in cheer and raised their cups. Tathar took over. "Men, who will share their wine with our commander?" The tent came up in another cheer, everyone raising their cups and offering them to Julius. It was an effort for him to smile, and finally, when he found a seat, Tathar found him a cup with rosewater in it. He drank and let out a deep breath. He didn't realize how thirsty and hot he was until he drank. He was still in his armor and suddenly he was sweating. He let his chest piece clatter to the floor and he stood up. "Let us drink a toast for those who laid down their lives so that we could be here tonight." The cheer died down, but everyone stood. "Thank you, my friends," he said to the empty air. "Be at peace. Hail the victorious dead." "Hail," the men chorused. Everyone drank, and then the cheer began to creep back into the tent. The Swan was sitting to one side on a high plinth, so his feet didn't touch the ground. He was smiling at everyone who looked at him with vacant and slurred eyes, and when he saw Julius, he attempted to make some kind of saluting motion and nearly fell off. "My lord," he slurred, "glad you could join us." Julius nodded. "I don't think I've ever seen you drink." "Well, there's a first time for everything, I suppose." The Swan shrugged as he examined the bottom of his cup. "I won't be making a habit of it, though. I don't like the smell of ale." "Have you tried wine, then?" Julius said. "It's fruitier." The Swan huffed. "It dulls the senses more, though." "Because having keen senses is on everybody's list at the moment." Julius sighed. "You can worry about that when we get back to Seaward." The Swan smiled and promptly fell off the plinth. He rose to his feet immediately and got another drink. The rest of the night blew over in a sea of alcohol and loud laughter. Julius managed to get his act together, and by the end of the night, he had started to drink wine and was substantially drunk by the end. The sun rose, and eventually, everyone woke. Tathar seemed to be the only one amongst them who wasn't hungover, and he was in good spirits. He came into the tent and threw water over the men. "All right, men. Shouldn't have drunk as much as you did. Morning drills. Move it." What the fuck are you doing? Julius groaned, emerging from his own tent. Basking in the wondrousness of command, Tathar said. Julius raised an eyebrow. The drill sergeant is dead. He shrugged. What? Just keep it down, Julius muttered. We should be getting back to Seaward. I wouldn't be in too much of a hurry to get back, Tathar warned, as the 30 men staggered past, barely able to keep their shields up. Now that you're a big man, you'll attract enemies. The high-end freaks hate a national hero. They'll pick on you because they can. Oh, what a life to look forward to, Julius sighed. Go on then, he waved dismissively to Tathar. Don't run them too far. They have earned a rest. Tathar nodded and began to jog after the men, who were more swaying from side to side than marching. You freak of nature, he said to himself. The march past the mountain was long and agonizing. After they said their goodbyes to the Fountain Legion, and Julius said a prayer with them, they departed. The sky was cloudless, and the sun was shining agonizingly down on them. The hot summer was here, and everyone was feeling the heat. They made their way to Pharas. The 5 soldiers that were there broke out in cheer at the sight of them. Gaelorn came rushing down from the main hall. By my father, he said. How? Divine intervention, Julius said, dismounting. The Fountain Legion saved us. Ah, shit, Gaelorn said. Being saved is generally a good thing, son, Tathar said, remaining mounted. Yes, I know, Gaelorn said. I sent Alfil and Yorlim ahead to bring word to your family. I was staying behind to gather up whatever we can before we abandon the castle. Well, Julius said, no need. He turned to the Swan. My friend, bring word to the city. Tell her the danger has passed, but we need aid. We have many wounded. The Swan simply nodded, turned his horse and galloped away. Only you few have survived, Gaelorn asked. We are all that is left standing, Julius toned, handing his horse to Stallion. 1,000 men defend the coast and the wounded. If another invasion is coming, we'll be ready for it.